Hello people. So I wanted to put forward a tentative concept. I'm not sure this really has any meaning. It's unlikely to actually be applied to anything. But there are two things I want to mention, and then I'll talk about the concept. One is how it relates to densities, and the other is how it relates to my personal life. One of the things that I've noticed when looking at people like Stefan Molyneux is that the way darkness is generally described is a little different for me than it is for a lot of people. So Stefan Molyneux goes the very much psychotherapy route. So the traditional psychotherapy route, you look at your past, you decide where you're going to assign accountability and such like that. But a lot of time for me, I had an illness, or I have an illness. I still have the same illness, but the treatment of it is improved. So I spent a lot of my life quite ill and not really realizing it. So the stress that my body was put through from this illness has created very real physical problems for me. But for the period of my life where my body was actively being destroyed, and so was my mind, I showed schizophrenic symptoms during this period. I was just incredibly stressed all the time, and I didn't have the self-awareness. I didn't have any self-awareness. Like an example, for a long period of time, I wanted to do coding. I wanted to get ahead on coding. I'd subscribed to a coding platform. I loved doing it. But I just was always stressed. I was always sleeping. I was always just a bit off in some way. And I was so stressed all the time. So it never got done. And the difference between how I feel that experience is compared to how I have described things through Stefan Molyneux's counselling and such like that is that in those sorts of things, in a lot of self-help types of things, in a lot of that journey as such, people take responsibility for the crap they did. You know, they unreason themselves out of silly excuses. They recognise that they did things a certain way in the past, now they're going to do things in a certain way in the future. But for me personally, that isn't a thing. And it's quite strange because you kind of feel like you're not doing something if you're not taking responsibility in the emotional way that it's described. Like, I don't mind taking responsibility for things, saying that my previous behaviours weren't ideal, that kind of thing. I've sent apologies to people, I've chatted with people. But it's not quite the same thing. I was unwell. I was partly compelled into behaviours that were dysfunctional. And a lot of my memories are jumbled up. They're not severely messed up. So I used to have an unbelievable memory. And I still do, I think, to an extent. I remember when I got a 12-figure number for a government thing, a 12-figure long code that I needed to put in, typed it in twice and remembered it for years later. And that memory that I kind of still have was a very functional memory. It was very numbers and things like that. Whereas now that my health is better and I'm not so stressed, I can think more emotionally. So I don't have the same tendency to think in numbers and stuff. I feel things a bit differently. I am more aware of my own emotions. And, you know, the onus isn't on me getting out there and fighting, because if I push too hard, I literally throw up. I mean, that is a problem that I have had recently. I overstress myself. I was just going for 3 days, and I literally rested for half one of those days. And I got so stressed, I just threw up. So it's not the same onus of responsibility and, you know, accountability and all that kind of stuff, really. It's kind of like a different thing that I'm dealing with. And so it's a different life experience. And as a result of that, I've put together different theories of how the world works because I've experienced it differently. And that's where this image comes in. But I'll also go into something else quick. I wanted to not say what density I thought Stefan Molyneux is from because it's probably not in line with free will. I mean, I'm a very fallible person, so that makes the free will thing less compelling. But I can't really get out of saying what density I think he's from, because his teachings are clearly a certain way and it's all fitting in to my points here. So if you look at this graph, you have the positive and negative of the fourth and fifth density. You have teaching of only love and teaching of only wisdom. And then you have at the top here, the in the purple, the point where the negative kind of dissolves and the positive then takes in as part of its lessons and understanding of the negative. That's why the purple is on both sides, whereas with the green and blue, they are clearly delineated on either side. This is because, as the law of one says, fourth and fifth density don't have any use for the negative. I mean, perhaps only as something to oppose. Once you get to sixth density, you're taking in the negative. So you're really understanding deep motivations, your own behavior, your own negativity, and you're relating to others. And that's where I think Stefan is. And I think a lot of what he teaches, or a good deal of what he teaches, is simply not relevant to someone that's low on the density. I do think take in some of what he knows, because obviously if I take in the way Stefan Molyneux thinks and the way he relates to people and the psychological rules that he describes, that's very, very useful for wisdom in relating to people. And it will get rid of any codependent types of issues or anything like that. But as far as the actual proper depth and the personal responsibility and all that goes, that stuff just doesn't fit with me. The wisdom density, the wisdom oriented to people tend to carve out a kind of isolated space and work within that. So they jettison the negativity, so to speak. And that's where you get this darker graph here. Now, within the dark, and I've shown that there are shades of it, to me, there is very little that can be gained from this. I mean, I look at the astrology and stuff, I do make insights and stuff, but it's not the same kind of thing that someone in the sixth density would do. And I tend to think very much that the analogy or the metaphor of Christianity, of being reborn, is very similar to this. I once talked to a psychologist that I believe was fifth density, and he once said to me when I was trying to figure out something, he just said, you know, you can't really analyze negativity. It just doesn't go anywhere. But, I mean, does someone like Stefan Molyneux believe that, or does he actually just ground down to what it means in his online counselling things? But yeah, the final point is that I think for some people and in some situations, there is no use or benefit to analysing that darkness. And this may very well go for certain sixth density people as well. I mean, I didn't see Carla Ruckert talking a great deal about darkness and such. But in that period of my life, there was no way out of the issues. It was just a big problem that was unsolvable. And so there's no real benefit gained from analysing that period, I don't think. But maybe that's just my perspective. Thank you for listening.